It was another Sunday morning. The station was relatively quiet, with only a few passengers milling about, huddling against the cold wind as they sipped their coffees. On platform 3, the trains came and went, their engines roaring like distant thunder, but one spot remained untouched by the bustle. A worn wooden bench, standing alone at the far end of the platform, had witnessed more stories than anyone could count. And on this particular morning, as on countless others before, sat Mary Whittaker, looking at the tracks as if waiting for something or someone. Her coat was long, gray, and well-worn, but her hands were tightly wrapped around a crumpled brown paper bag. She didn't need to check the time. She knew exactly when it was. It had been 20 years since she had first sat on this bench, 20 years since Daniel had disappeared without a trace. The station around her had changed, of course. New stores had opened, new faces had come and gone. But this bench had stayed the same. Nerihadienti. Time had made its mark on her. Her hair had turned silver, her face lined with age, but her eyes, the eyes that once shone with hope and love, were now clouded with quiet resignation. Still, every Sunday she came, and every Sunday she waited. She waited for a train that would never arrive. 20 years ago, Daniel had been just 17, an excited young boy who had dreams of seeing the world. His father had left when he was a baby, and Mary had done everything she could to raise him on her own. She had made sacrifices, missed promotions at work, put off plans of her own dreams, but she had always been there for Daniel. He was her whole world. And then one day, he walked out of the house with a backpack, told her he was going to visit a friend in the city. He said he'd be back by the evening, and she kissed him goodbye, slipped a sandwich into his bag, and wrote him a note. "Call me when you get there." He never called. He never came back. The police had searched, of course. They had asked questions, investigated leads, but they never found anything. It was as if Daniel had simply vanished into thin air. The only clue they found was his backpack, abandoned at the train station, near platform 5. For years, Mary had lived in a fog of unanswered questions. What had happened to her son? Was he still alive? Had he run away? No one could answer. And so, she had done the only thing she could. She came here, every Sunday, waiting for him. It was the next Sunday when he first spoke to her. Mary had been sitting on the bench, looking out at the tracks, when she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. "Mind if I sit here?" Mary turned to see a young man standing by the bench, a camera hanging around his neck, his dark hair falling into his eyes. He looked familiar, but she couldn't place him. There was something about his expression, something in his gaze, that made her feel like she had seen him before, though she was sure she hadn't. "Of course," she replied, her voice soft and weathered. She shifted slightly to give him more room. He sat down, setting his camera on the bench beside him. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The trains continued to come and go, their sounds blending with the wind and the low hum of the station. "I see you here every week," the young man said eventually. "You've been coming for a long time, haven't you?" Mary glanced at him. She didn't answer right away. What was there to say? Everyone knew her here, or at least knew her routine. The other regulars at the station had taken to calling her the Sunday widow, though she wasn't sure why. She wasn't a widow. Her husband had left her years ago. She was just waiting for her son. "Yes," she replied finally. "I've been coming here for 20 years. The young man nodded thoughtfully. "What are you waiting for?" She looked out at the tracks again, feeling a wave of sadness wash over her. "I'm waiting for my son," she said quietly. "Daniel. He disappeared 20 years ago. Right here. At this station." The young man fell silent, his gaze lingering on her face. There was something about her, something in her eyes that told him this wasn't just a casual visit. She wasn't just someone passing through. "You're waiting for him to come back," he said, though it wasn't really a question. Mary nodded slowly. Every Sunday. I've been waiting every Sunday since he disappeared. Over the next few weeks, the young man, whose name was Evan, returned. At first, their conversations were brief, just small talk about the weather or the station. But eventually they began to talk about deeper things. Evan had recently moved to the city, a freelance photographer trying to make his way in the world. He had been working on a project about forgotten places, and Mary's bench was one of the places he had chosen to photograph. He came to know her story, bit by bit, as she opened up. At first, it was just snippets. How Daniel had been a bright, loving boy. How she had tried to protect him from the world. How he had always been her joy, her pride. But one day, after sitting there for several hours without saying much, Evan asked her something that caught her off guard. "Do you ever think maybe he just ran away?" he asked. Mary's eyes hardened. "No. I know my son. He didn't run away. Something happened to him. Something terrible." Evan watched her closely, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Have you ever wondered if maybe he's still out there somewhere?" Mary turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had wondered that, of course. Who hadn't? But the truth was, she didn't have the strength to hope anymore. "I don't know. I don't know if I can keep hoping." Over the next few weeks, the young man, whose name was Evan, returned. At first, their conversations were brief, just small talk about the weather or the station. But eventually, they began to talk about deeper things. Evan had recently moved to the city, a freelance photographer trying to make his way in the world. He had been working on a project about forgotten places, and Mary's bench was one of the places he had chosen to photograph. He came to know her story, bit by bit, as she opened up. At first, it was just snippets. How Daniel had been a bright, loving boy. How she had tried to protect him from the world. How he had always been her joy, her pride. But one day, after sitting there for several hours without saying much, Evan asked her something that caught her off guard. "Do you ever think maybe he just ran away?" he asked. Mary's eyes hardened. "No. I know my son. He didn't run away. Something happened to him. Something terrible." Evan watched her closely, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Have you ever wondered if maybe he's still out there somewhere?" Mary turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had wondered that, of course. Who hadn't? But the truth was, she didn't have the strength to hope anymore. "I don't know. I don't know if I can keep hoping." The weeks stretched on. With each passing Sunday, Mary began to feel a small flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Evan had a way of coaxing the stories out of her, listening patiently as she talked about her son, about her love for him, and the emptiness she felt in his absence. It wasn't just the stories about Daniel, though. Evan was slowly becoming a part of her routine. He showed up every week, sitting on the same bench with her, never asking too many questions, just sharing the silence. There were moments when she forgot the pain, even if just for a while, as they watched the trains go by together. One particular Sunday, as they sat together, a gust of wind rattled through the station, pulling Mary out of her thoughts. She glanced up at Evan, who seemed lost in thought, his camera resting on his lap. "Evan," she said quietly, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. "Why do you come here every week? What is it that draws you to this place?" Evan hesitated. His eyes dropped to the camera in his hands, and his fingers nervously adjusted the lens. He had never really explained to her why he kept returning. I don't know," he said finally, his voice soft. "It's just that there's something about this place. Something about you." Mary frowned slightly. "About me?" Evan nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "I know it sounds strange, but there's something about your story, about how you keep coming here, even after all these years. It reminds me of someone I've been trying to find for a long time." Mary's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Evan looked away, the weight of the words he was about to say heavy on his shoulders. I was adopted, he said almost in a murmur. When I was a baby, my parents, they left me at a train station in New Jersey. I was found there when I was just a few days old. I've been trying to trace my biological parents for years, but I've never gotten any real answers. Mary sat back, her heart racing. Why are you telling me this? Evan looked up at her with a faint smile, though his eyes were filled with sadness. Because when you told me your son's name, Daniel Whitaker, something clicked in my head. I don't know why, but I've been feeling this strange connection ever since I first met you. And I think Daniel might be my father. Mary stared at Evan, her mind spinning. For a moment, the world seemed to stop around her. The sound of the trains, the hum of the station, all faded into the background as she processed his words. No, it can't be, she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. Daniel, my son, your father? Evan nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. I know it sounds crazy, but when I found out that Daniel had gone missing from this very station, I couldn't ignore the possibility anymore. Mary clutched her hands together tightly, her knuckles white. I don't understand, she said, struggling to grasp the enormity of what he was saying. My son. He was just a kid when he disappeared. He would never leave me like that. He wouldn't. Evan gently placed a hand on her arm, his voice soft but firm. I'm not saying he abandoned you. I think something happened to him, something terrible. But I believe that you and I are connected somehow, Mary. I believe I'm here for a reason. The air between them was thick with tension. Mary's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. A piece of her wanted to reject the idea, to hold on to the memories of her son, as she had always known them. But there was another part of her, the part that had lived in silence for so long, that felt a flicker of truth in Evan's words. You look like him, she murmured, her eyes filling with tears. You have his eyes, his smile. I've seen that before. Evan swallowed hard, looking away. I've never had a family, never known where I came from. But somehow I think I've always known. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and the quiet, overwhelming realization that something monumental was happening in her life. Evan had contacted a private investigator, who found records of a missing person report for Daniel Whitaker. A DNA test had been arranged. Mary didn't know what to think, what to feel. Her heart ached with uncertainty. What if Evan wasn't Daniel's son? What if this was just a coincidence? But then again, how could she deny the connection she felt? The way he looked at her, the way he spoke about his past, everything about him reminded her of her son. Finally, after weeks of waiting, the results arrived. Mary sat with Evan in her small living room, the envelope trembling in her hands. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice shaky. Evan took the envelope from her gently, his hands warm and steady. We'll get through this together, he said quietly. The moment of truth arrived as they opened the envelope and read the results aloud. Match confirmed. Daniel Whitaker is the biological father of Evan Marshall. The room seemed to spin as Mary absorbed the news. For a moment she felt lightheaded, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions. Her son, the one she had waited for all these years, had a child of his own. She had never known. The son she had loved, the one she had lost. He had left behind a legacy. As the weeks turned into months, Mary and Evan's bond deepened. They spent more time together, piecing together the fragments of Daniel's life and their own connection. Evan shared his memories of growing up in foster care, the longing he'd always felt for something more. And Mary told him about the son she had lost, about the boy who had once held her heart. They never found out what happened to Daniel. The mystery remained a haunting shadow over their lives, a question that would never be answered. But for the first time in 20 years, Mary didn't feel alone. She had Evan, the living proof of the son she had lost and loved. Every Sunday they sat together on the bench, watching the trains come and go. And every Sunday, Mary felt a little less like she was waiting for something that would never come. One crisp fall morning, as they sat on the bench, Evan turned to her with a thoughtful look on his face. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about what we could do next." Mary looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I want to share your story," he said. "I want to make sure that people know what it means to never give up, to wait, even when you don't know what you're waiting for." Mary smiled through her tears. She had never thought her story was worth telling, but Evan saw something in it that she hadn't been able to see herself. The camera clicked as Evan took another photograph, this time capturing the two of them on the bench together. For the first time in a long time, Mary felt like she was no longer just waiting. She was living. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.